The Institute for the Study of Peak States presents the first International Psychoimmunology and Psychobiology Research Symposium, Subcellular Cases Causing Relationship Issues and the Optimal Relationship State, presented by Shayne McKenzie.
So I'm Shayne McKenzie. I'm the CEO, clinic director, and one of the certified trainers here at the Institute for the Study of Peak States. And I'm actually going to be the presenter for the first session today. When we were looking at what options I might actually talk about, as I've been a certified therapist for over 10 years with the Institute, clinic director, so there's lots of different research projects I'm involved in and lots of different treatments I do with clients. But the one area that I'm most passionate about is actually working with clients on relationship issues. I'm a big fan of love, helping people get loving, fulfilling, rewarding relationships. So that was the topic that I actually chose to speak about today. So the thing we're going to talk about with relationships, there's lots of, so I'm not a psychologist, I'm not a relationship counsellor. My training from a therapist perspective has been as a peak states therapist. And there are lots of effective therapists and psychologists who work on relationship issues. But there are some relationship issues that you really do need to understand this area of subcellular psychobiology to understand how to address those relationship issues. And at the end of this, we're also going to talk about the optimal relationship state, which is more of a peak state process. So firstly, I'm going to talk about some of my own personal, just very briefly, just give you a little bit of background from a personal perspective around family and intimate relationships, which is, where we learn a lot of this stuff is in our personal lives. But obviously most of the presentation is going to be around the work that I've done with clients on relationship issues and talking about the subcellular psychobiology model and how that actually helps us diagnose and treat these kind of issues. And then, as I said, right at the end, I'm going to talk about optimal relationship states. So just a little bit from a personal perspective. So my parents got divorced when I was about 8, but I don't really think I experienced trauma from that. I felt like it was the right decision. So I definitely had the view that I wanted, when I got married, I wanted it to be forever. I got married quite young. I was 19 when I found out I was going to be a dad. I was 21 when I got married. And I actually married the mother of my children twice. So the first time we were married for about 15 years. Most of that was very good, but at the end we were arguing quite a bit, separated or got divorced. Had a few years apart, did a lot of personal development in that time, got to realise that there were lots of things I wasn't doing very well in the relationship. I could have been a much better husband, worked out how to heal some of that stuff, developed and grew. Had no intentions of actually ever getting back with her, but in this personal development course, they kept on saying, okay, who's the person you're most upset in your life and deal with that issue? And eventually got to the point where created a good friendship with her again, initially just for the kids, but then over time the attraction was there again and we got married again. The second time was much better. Definitely did develop and grow and learn from that experience. And but at the end of once the kids are grown up, and that's my kids on the top one is our youngest. He's actually 26 this month, so that's a long time ago. That's about 20 years ago, that photo, but it's a very cute photo. And then my oldest on the bottom got married a couple of years ago, so that's at his wedding there. So once both the boys had grown up, while we weren't really arguing, we really were leading completely separate lives. So we decided to separate and divorce again, and she's now been remarried. So twice quite long marriages, 8 years and 15 years. A couple of years before that, a few years in between those two marriages, and a few years after that, quite a lot of short-term relationships. So what I found in each of those short-term relationships, pretty quickly they'd last maybe 2 to 5 months. that I could see some things that I was really attracted to them, but I didn't necessarily see that there was a long-term relationship, or sometimes they figured that out before I did. So that's where I learned a lot in those different relationships. So onto the therapy stuff. So there's a range of different relationships issues that I want to talk about. So I'm going to go through these one at a time. I'm not going to go through, this is not a training session, so I'm not going to go through what's in any detail around what the treatment is. I more want to describe what's the subcellular case that's behind this, so you can actually see that this approach actually allows you to address relationship issues that other highly effective therapy techniques may not actually address this without actually really understanding what's going on at a primary cell level. So let's go through these one at a time. So starting with a quote. So I just miss him and I hate being so alone. So this is a really good quote that kind of summarizes this. Probably the common thing that you'll hear a client with this particular issue is, you know, I've got this missing feeling, or I'm longing for someone, or, you know, this sadness that they're not here anymore. And so I remember about a year ago, I met someone, and, you know, for the first time, and, you know, they were kind of sharing that their relationship had broken up a few weeks ago, and, you know, they really were not in a good space about this. They were missing them, really longing for them, but also, you know, frustrated and annoyed with them as well, and didn't know how to deal with this. And so pretty quickly I hypothesized that this was the actual issue that was going on. So because we know how this feels in the body, so the diagram on the left, the experience is that it's like there's a little scoop that's kind of missing in your body, which is a little bit strange when you ask someone, does it feel like there's a scoop of your flesh actually missing in your body? But the people who have this subcellular case, that's exactly how they experience it. And the reason that's what they experience is, on the right-hand side, it's showing that in the primary cell, the trauma string, the biographical traumas, the cytoplasm is actually separated. So that's the structural issue that's there. And so if you don't understand that it's this structural issue, you're not likely to identify how to actually heal this particular issue. So in less than 10 minutes, I was able to diagnose and help this person actually heal this particular issue. They couldn't believe how quickly their feelings about this person had actually changed. And it worked so well, she said, wow, I want to do this training. So not long after that, she actually signed up to do the training. So that's, we actually call this SOLOS in the subcellular psychobiology book and in our trainings. So then a quote for the next one. So when we're incomplete, we're always searching for somebody to complete us. When after a few years or a few months of relationship, we find that we're still unfulfilled, we blame our partners, and we take up with somebody more promising. So this situation is basically at a subconscious level. There's a structural issue in us that feels like we need others to constantly give us the love and attention that we need to feel complete. It's actually one of the ones that I've found in working in relationships is it makes such a big difference for a person, because it's so emotionally painful to just constantly feel like you need this love and attention. And so when you're not getting it, you can be really upset around this. So there's quite a number of times with this type of issue has actually come up. And in these situations, it's not that often that a client will show up and say, oh, the problem I've got is I'm really needy in relationships. Can you help me with that? That's typically not what actually happens, although some people are self-aware. And in fact, a couple of people who actually helped us as certified therapists were self-aware that this is what was happening in the relationships, and actually helped us identify what the root cause was, and be able to study what was going on at a primary cell level to work out what the treatment for this would be. Most of the time, what's happening in a client situation here is they're talking about their dissatisfaction in the relationship, And you can hear in the way that they're talking about is that they unconsciously have this drive to get love and attention from the other person. And that's actually, so rather than dealing with the symptom of, the other person's not giving them what they need, you actually heal this structural issue in themselves. And now you no longer need the other person to be giving you that love and attention all the time. Obviously we want love from others, but it's a very different experience when you actually need that from others. And that's what actually happens in this situation. Now, the diagram needs a little bit of adjustment, but in the research process, we're constantly reviewing things. And while it is a structure, it feels like a structure in the middle of the body, the way we diagnose this is you actually have two fingers kind of going down the center of your body, just very lightly touching your body. And if you find a spot where it feels like one or both of your fingers almost get sucked in, like there's a mini vacuum in that spot of your body. So just many people, most people probably have this issue and not only in one location, most people actually have this kind of sensation of, we call it a S-hole, a sucking hole in that particular location, that it's usually in several places that they actually have this. And so the experience for that to leave, it's just such a relief for the clients when they finally heal this, that they no longer have to have others kind of giving them that love and attention. Makes a really big difference for people to not have this anymore. So I really like it when I get the opportunity to help people with this structural issue. So then the next one's definitely not a new concept. Definitely in psychology and relationship counselling, this idea of being codependent with others, or these little, on the left-hand diagram, these little connections between each others, in some fields called chords. So that's what we call it in our practice. We call it chording. In these kind of situations, so one client I worked with, the issue was the relationship with the mum, and she kind of summarised this as, it feels like my mum owns me. Now, there was a lot of different, there wasn't just courting that we had to work with. There was a number of different issues that we had to work with to completely resolve that issue for her. But certainly courting was one of the things that we needed to work on. And so what's actually happening here is both people have matching traumas that are connecting them in some way. So it's not that they're the same traumas, they're actually matching traumas. So one might need to feel like they're the helper, and lots of therapists will have this. And so the other person has to have some kind of trauma that, maybe they feel weak or dependent, and they need someone else to help them or look out for them or something. So there's that matching trauma that has them in this codependent relationship where they're courting. And you, as the diagram shows, you can actually have several chords with the one person. So there are techniques to heal this kind of one chord at a time. So we have one technique we call distant personality release, that's in the basic wholehearted healing manual that Grant and Mary authored. But there's other techniques that can probably address that as well. But one of the things that we can do with our methods, now that we understand you can heal just the traumas that are the courting is actually happening on, but the mechanism by which they're courting is one of the things that we discovered in our field, which is a fungus that actually has this connection possible between people. So on the top, we've got this kind of fungus kind of entering into the primary cell, connecting to the matching traumas. And then the bottom one is, both people actually have this fungus, and it's almost like there's this collective consciousness that are almost communicating like radio waves that creates this chording. And so while you can eliminate the chords one at a time using some kind of effective trauma healing technique, one of the things you can also do by understanding that there's a fungus involved here in the mechanism is you can actually eliminate that fungus altogether. And we do actually have a treatment for that. We call it silent mind technique, but because it does actually have you with the common voices disappearing, and so you do end up feeling like you've got a silent mind, but it actually does a whole lot of other things as well. So it does eliminate this cording for all people, all cords for all people. So it's a really great thing to eliminate, and therefore helps a lot in relationship issues. So then this is something that Grant only discovered probably 2 years ago. And initially it kind of came up with people who were trying to do some trauma and feeling like there was this resistance to actually move forward and actually have this trauma happen, complete the trauma healing. And I'm not quite sure, Grant gets some great intuitive hits sometimes, and he asked the question around, does it feel like there's the presence of someone around you? And in this case, the person said, yeah, it feels like I can feel the presence of my father. And so kind of came up with a healing technique so that she no longer felt the presence of her father, which in some way she felt like was a kind of manipulation. In some ways, the presence was that her father didn't want her to change who she was, at an unconscious level, didn't want her to actually move forward with this healing. And so eliminating that presence of that person, or the feeling that person's presence is there, then eliminates this ability for that person to consciously or unconsciously manipulate you in some way. Other ways that people might experience this is, if you've had the experience where you end up buying something and you didn't really need it, and you're not quite sure why you actually bought it. This is probably the mechanism that's actually happening. Again, this is a fungal issue in the primary cell that we call the manipulation fungus. So the technique requires actually healing both the subconscious need to kind of hold on to whatever the emotion is that person is radiating, but also your trauma around why you're susceptible or vulnerable to this type of manipulation. So as an example, a very dear friend of mine, last year separated with her husband, and some of the upset that she had in the interactions in kind of deal with the parenting and other stuff that you need to go through in the separation was this manipulation fungus that was at play. So she was in a much better space to be able to then deal with him after healing this particular issue. So then we've got a quote from Deepak Chopra around, when you struggle with your partner, you are struggling with yourself. Every fault you see in them touches a denied weakness in yourself. So many of you could probably figure out that we're actually talking about a projection. And so again, this is not necessarily anything new. People, the idea of what's happening internally, what you experience out in the world, you project that onto others. What our model actually helps us with is actually understanding what's actually happening at an unconscious level. So the unconscious mind in our model is made up of what we call triune brains. There's actually 7 pairs of these triune brains, and there's some inner conflict between them. And so whatever that inner conflict is that's happening inside of us, we then project into our external world. We do this a lot with our partners, but in particular, if we see this projection happening with many people, and sometimes there's a lot of people, so we can have this projection around all men or around all women. So they're really good projections to actually heal. And so what we're actually healing when the technique that we use for projections is actually healing this inner conflict that's happening within the triune brains, the unconscious mind part of our model. Then we've got this unusual situation where someone might feel really evil to you, or really, really negative in some way. So they're not just sad, but they're sad in a way that I feel sad, so I'm going to make sure that you feel sad as well. They've got that kind of an evil twist to the emotion that they're radiating. Now, this doesn't come up a great deal. This is a pretty rare situation in relationships, but it is one to definitely help with, and a fairly simple technique to do that. But in this situation, we'll ask the client, can you feel a specific place on the person where that feels like this evil or very negative emotion is radiating? And, vast majority of the time they can feel the specific location. So you can see in here we've got 3 locations. This is very rare that you would have 2 people with exactly the same spots. So the thing that they're then really surprised about is whatever that location is, and then so let's say they feel it on their left shoulder, you get the client that you're working with say, now put your awareness in your left shoulder. Can you actually feel that you've got a spot there that actually is radiating that same kind of evil or very negative feeling? And so they were a little bit surprised to discover that they can feel that as well, because we don't want to feel this evil, negative feeling in ourselves. But when and the reason this isn't that common that people will notice this in others is that the only time that you'll notice it is that they actually have exactly the same structural issue that you have. So this spot on the body that you feel, this negative spot, it corresponds to a part in the primary cell that we call the pine cone, because it looks like it's the shape of a pine cone. And so if there's a structural issue in that, there's a gap in the pine cone, that gap in the pine cone corresponds to the spot in your body that's radiating this kind of evil type, very negative feeling. And so if the client then heals that structural issue in themselves, they no longer can now feel that evil or very negative feeling radiating from the other person, because it's only when you both have the same structural issue that you resonate, and therefore you can feel it in them, which then allows you to heal that in yourself. Then the last one that I wanted to talk about, which again is unusual around how this actually happens, but we probably have heard many people that have had this issue around dysfunctional sexual attraction. The experience being that the client feels like they're attracted to the person, even though consciously they know the person's not right for them. And so Grant kind of touches on this on the video that he made around ribosomal voices, and what he's the same. There's a similar, the same mechanism that's actually happening in both of these cases. There's a little bit more that happens later on with the voices, but in the case of the dysfunctional sexual attraction, when you're in the womb as the baby, you actually get a physical injury, and with that physical injury, you're then reaching out to mum going, help me, I want to feel safe, my survival's at threat. And so whatever mum's feeling at that time, so in this situation, the example is, mum's feeling sad. So now we create this structure in the primary cell that has us associate sadness with survival, or sadness and feeling safe. So that kind of stays there in the primary cell from that moment onwards. And then later on in life, you actually meet someone and they're radiating this same emotion of sadness that mum was feeling when you had this physical injury in utero. And so you don't know why, but unconsciously you actually have this attraction for them. And that's because that sadness emotion that they're radiating at an unconscious level for you makes you feel safe, that you wanted to feel when your survival was at threat. So we have a simple healing technique to actually break that association, and then you'll no longer feel like you're sexually attracted to them. And then you can make a conscious decision around whether there's someone that you actually want to have in your life. So that's a pretty good one to actually help people with if they've got that problem. Okay, so that's the range of relationship issues that I wanted to talk about, and there's many others as well. I just wanted to give you a bit of a sense of how this subcellular psychobiology really helps us diagnose and treat some very common but also some unusual situations that we come across in relationships. So to finish off with a quote for the last topic I want to talk about. The meeting of two personalities is like the contact of two chemical substances. If there is any reaction, both are transformed. So the optimal relationship state is not just that there's any reaction, it is an amazing relationship around the connection that the two people have. And surprisingly, one of the most common things in this type of relationship is just how much they like each other. I mean, obviously there's love there, but it's actually how much they like each other that's actually the thing that has them in this optimal relationship state. Now, unfortunately, the optimal relationship state is not very common. Grant, I think, has said maybe, 5 or 6 couples he's seen in this optimal relationship state. He might correct me later if I got that number wrong. I think I've met 2 or 3 people that I suspect are in this optimal relationship state. And so we believe that people most people, if not everyone, is probably unconsciously trying to get into this state where because you really like each other, you're best friends, you really support and encourage each other, which makes it, you feel like there's a real strong platform for you to be kind of out in the world. You can do anything because of that support and encouragement that you get from your partner. They unconditionally accept who you are. They like you just as you are. People when they're married, there's quite often jokes around how the sexual attraction kind of drops off over time. But in this optimal relationship, that attraction is there all the time. Now, maybe the frequency of the sex might reduce, and maybe it won't. But that sexual attraction is always there. They like the smell of each other. They love to cuddle and touch and lots of physical contact. And they feel really happy and optimistic around the future with their partner when they're in this optimal relationship state. They don't need to be alone from the person at all. They just really enjoy each other's company. And even when they're not physically together, it's like they can still feel their presence there all the time. So as you can imagine, this is really a great state to be in. Now, unfortunately, we actually haven't worked out what's the trauma that needs to be healed to get into this optimal relationship state. It is a relationship where both people need to be in this state to have this full experience. But it is one of the many things that's on our research list that one day we hope to be able to figure out what the trauma is that we can heal so that everyone can be in this optimal relationship state. So that's all I have to talk about. I hope you found that informative. So now, any questions from the audience? So Evan Fee is asking the question, any thoughts on what is called twin flames? So that's a really good question. So I don't know for sure. Certainly there is some of the research that we've done where there are experiences that you have when you heal certain things. There is the experience of having a flame inside you. So it is possible that that state of consciousness where you actually experience that flame could be what's called the twin flames. But it could also be this optimal relationship state could also be that as well. So I think that's about all I'm going to say on that for now. So there are a number of other questions here, but I'm probably a couple of minutes over now. So I'm actually going to wrap up for now. I'll now be in the background, so I'll see if I can answer some more of these questions by typing responses to the many questions that have actually come through. And anyone that wants to contact me personally, I think most people here probably have my email address from the registration details, but anyone who wanted to contact me, my email address is Shayne, which is actually with a Y, SHAYNE, @peakstates.com. So thank you very much.
Thank you for watching. For more information, please visit peakstatestherapy.com/relationship.html.